Hello and welcome to Office of Harvard. I'm talking about the books I read in June. It is a cold and dreary and cloudy day in Sydney, but if I don't do this now, then I probably will forget about all the books that I've read. And this little blemish on my face has been here for 3 months and it won't go away. Anyways, books I will have here. Reading a lot of orange books lately. I don't really know what the correlation is, but we'll start with the Burrow by Melanie Cheng. This is a COVID novel, and it's, I think, the first novel I've read that has been specifically about COVID. We follow a family of four who, well, it's a complicated family situation. They're isolating together after the youngest daughter of the family has recently passed away. The grandmother on the maternal side is responsible for the death of this child. And so we have this very, very grim situation. And amidst all of this, the father, Jin, decides to go and purchase a rabbit for the young daughter to take care of. It's an interesting book. I think when I think about that particular era of COVID, I often forget how strict Melbourne's lockdown was. And this book is set in Melbourne. It was far more restrictive and was longer, and it was also much more like regionally restrictive than what I experienced in Sydney. Sydney, I feel like, because I was an essential worker, I was out of the house in a few months, whereas in Melbourne they went for, I believe it was hundreds of days where everyone was just isolating at home. And so we have this story of Jin, who is a doctor, and Melanie Cheng as well is a doctor, and she writes a lot about her personal experiences in the medical field here. My issue with this book is it's kind of twofold. So it felt a bit too close to what I knew of the author's life for me, and I don't really know why that bothers me, because write what you know, of course. But we have the female lead character whose name is Amy. She's also a doctor, and she's also working on her second novel. The Burrow is Melanie Cheng's second novel, and so we have this real kind of resonance with this character that to me feels very familiar and very close to home. The author also has a bunny. So it's one of those novels that's very sad and tries to explore this very grim part of the human experience. We show characters going through one of the most difficult experiences that a person could really go through. For what it's worth, it's not that kind of really sappy, we got a bunny and that fixed everything kind of story. It is a bit more delicate than that. But I also feel like introducing this idea of COVID, and the novel's perspective is interesting to me because it's split perspective. It has chapters for each character of the four characters in this house. And I thought that was a really interesting choice, because usually when you do split perspective, it's because we've got characters going to different places and traveling away and seeing how being away and being at home changes people. Whereas when I got this perspective in this novel, I thought, well, they're going to be in the house for a while. It seems weird to see everyone's thoughts in each individual room. And midway through the book, I do see why this was the choice. Like, I do get that it's a meaningful narrative choice. But ultimately, I think as I'm reading, I'm not along with this book. I'm kind of questioning the choices being made in it. And I don't know why I'm so strict against it. I think it's very functional and it's very successful. But I also just didn't really feel these emotions because I was just, for some reason, just constantly critiquing it. And maybe this is just a bad reading on me. Maybe I'm just unnecessarily cruel. But I gave it a 3 stars. My reading experience was kind of understanding the book and going along with it, but not really being transported by it, unfortunately. That was 2 timelines, by the way. I do find it interesting the way this book, that the saddest stuff, like the most dramatic stuff, happens before the book starts. It kind of happens off stage for this play. And so it really is a book about the aftermath of things that happen. That, I think, to me, makes it harder as well, because we're not really placed in the sad situation. We're experiencing the sadness that happens after the situation. And so it's a lot less kinetic in that sense, too. Book number 2 for First Line Game, Between a Wolf and a Dog by Blain. I'm cheating a little bit by including 2 lines, but here are the first 2 lines. This is the dream. Lawrence is alone. It is not quite dark between a wolf and a dog. A mauve light is deepening like a bruise. The cold breath of wind, a low moan in his ear. I was fascinated by it. I wasn't familiar with the phrase between a wolf and a dog. That's a French proverb to mean around twilight, between midnight and, like, between the feeling of being threatened and between the feeling of safety. So we have this day in the life story, and Blain, the author, very tragically passed away from cancer not long after this book was published. But this is a novel about... It's a day in the life of, again, a very complicated family structure. We follow a workday of a psychologist who is interviewing various clients. She's been separated from her husband, who is a polar. This is an interesting job. I didn't know this job existed before reading this book. It's a person who telephones people and gets data and interprets that data. And so these two individuals have various crises across their workday. In the meantime, the psychologist's aging mother receives a diagnosis of cancer. And so we have this unfolding of these lives and the psychological complexity of these characters. It's interesting, actually, that I read this so close to the Burrow, because they are both big, sad Australian novels. I think Between a Wolf and a Dog is much, much more successful in the way that it conveys mood and tone. I think it's a little bit more mysterious. It's just not so prescriptive about what its characters are feeling. And so we're given that space to really sit with people. I think what I've come to realize too is that I love work. And so because the Burrow is about the work of a novelist, and also its work scenes are a bit hampered by the fact that lockdown prevents these characters. Although the doctors, they do go to the hospital, we don't see as many detailed scenes of them living out their work lives. Whereas Between a Wolf and a Dog is very unabashedly just a day in the life. You see these characters go to work. And I really appreciate the way that these working identities and personalities shape the people that exist in this book, and really show us how these people are the way they are, how they're motivated by the sense of justice and the sense of duty, how they react to different human beings based on how they communicate with clients and communicate with stakeholders. I think that's just really interesting. And so I like this characterization here. I think it's all done really well. The ending also did get to me in quite an emotional level. Like, the sadness was very real. I thought the dialogue was really well done, and the descriptions of the environments, both the city and the countryside, are very, very beautiful. It makes you kind of appreciate that aesthetic sadness of a rainy day, and you still feel really kind of safe and cared for, even though we are grappling with terminal illness and really, really depressing things in the human condition. And although these characters can't really communicate to each other on a meaningful emotional level, I feel like the prose and the way that it understands these characters, and it forgives them for acting in quite a difficult way, I felt very cared for. I felt like these emotions were very valid for these characters, and I didn't feel like any of them were being judged for their actions in any point of the story. And so I did really respect the way the story unfolded. I would give it 4 stars. I do wonder about the kind of state of Australian literary landscape when we have all these just day-in-the-life novels of real human beings doing sad things. I like this style of writing, and I think I will continue to like it. I will continue to seek it out, and I don't have a problem with it. But I also am starting to realize that there's a repeating pattern, and there's 3 books that I've read this month that are on this pattern. So, I don't know. I think, will things change in the future? Will there be a new trend? I'm not really sure. A third book, I just want to make a quick mention of this. So I did read The Hand That Signs the Paper by Helen Demidenko, or Helen Darville. One of the famous literary hoaxes of ever, really. In fact, the plot of the book Yellowface is almost exactly this. So we have an author who is not of Jewish or Ukrainian background writing about Jewish people in Ukraine, and the way that Ukrainian people participated in the genocide of Jewish people in World War II. It is a very emotionally blank novel, and I understand why there's so much furor about... And I feel bad talking about this because I don't want to dig up skeletons from the 1990s, but I really do understand the hoax of this book is really quite egregious, that an author would fabricate their backstory in order to write a historical fiction piece that they don't personally have any connection to. It's hard for me to discern whether these representations of Jewish people and Ukrainian people are accurate or are stereotypical, because I'm not from that background, and for what it's worth, the author, although it's not from personal experience, has still done more research than I have in this field. And so I can't say if it's accurate, I can't say if it's genuine. it does just feel very sour in my mouth having read it, because emotionally it is just a really, really washed out piece of writing, and it doesn't seem to grapple with the emotional ramifications of both the perpetrators and the victims of this targeted killing. So what am I supposed to feel about this other than that there is darkness in the human condition, and it is entirely possible for these things to happen, which is, I mean, a meaningful moral to say, but ultimately, the question of right, which I think it's interesting how World War II features so much in the Australian literary consciousness. I feel like so many of our award winners, Narrow Road to the Deep North and The Schindler's Ark, the two significant Booker Prize-winning Australian novels, are both set in World War II. We're really fascinated by this, and we're really fascinated by this soldier myth. I don't know. I would say, to the extent that the Miles Franklin Prize is about enshrining works and making sure that they're remembered, then this is a terrible book to have won that prize. Absolutely don't read it. And I think as a cautionary tale about how we think about authors' identities and how we marry identity to content in a story, especially when it's one as sensitive as the Holocaust, it leaves more room to think about it. That's all I'll say. And I think it's interesting thinking about this, contrasted to something like Yellowface, which I think is just a very sensationalized way of looking at this. This is a book where there's real people involved and real impacts on the Australian literary scene. I don't have any answers for it, but I mean, having read this book, it's not good. I'm glad to move on to something I do enjoy. Painting Portraits of Everyone I've Ever Dated by Joseph Earp is just a really delightful book. It is a millennial fiction footnote, to be honest. It's like, it really hits what I feel. And so we have this character who is a painter, and she's one of those very rare successful artists where she's winning prizes, she can make a living off her commissions. And I like that even though we have this character who's supposed to have made it, the main conflict of this book is that it doesn't really bring the kind of fulfillment that you would expect. And in the same way, the relationships that she's gone through in this quest to paint every portrait of everyone she's ever dated, neither of those things have given her that feeling of absolution either. And so it's really a book of, does absolution exist? Where do we find it? And is it wrong to try and seek total absolution in a romantic partner when they could never really provide that for you? And along the way, it's just a really funny book. I think that there's just jokes that really consistently land all the way through, and we have characters who are really fun to read about, and it's just enjoyable. I like that everyone's like just a little bit more exaggerated than real life, and so we get to see, it's kind of like hanging out with your friends, but your friends are just bigger in some way. And so although it doesn't do anything extremely outlandish or truly memorable, I was just smiling the whole time, and that's just the sign of a good book, really, right? I genuinely give this a 5 out of 5. I think it's just a delight, and isn't it nice to enjoy reading? What a horrible thing to say on this book channel, but isn't it nice to enjoy reading sometimes? Ugh, what a transition. Vanity Fair. So this is my loose ends. This is one of those books that I have to read for that BBC 100 challenge. It is really not a book that I ever thought I would ever finish in my life. And it was a huge slog. Genuinely hard to read. Because it's a book about gossip. And it's a book about popular culture in the 1800s. A time period of 1800s England, the upper class, and it's just really a time that I did not have any personal connection to. So reading about their characters and their attempts to kind of make a living in this Regency society is just not exciting for me when the prose just constantly has to keep name dropping these references to this time period. There's so many references to Shakespeare, to classical poetry, to social decorum, flower languages, just everything. Like, this book this edition for me is 650 pages, and there are more than 700 endnotes, which means that on average, on every page, you're going to the back and going, this is what this means. And it really hinders the pacing of this book. It is not a well-paced book at all. It does have a lot of interesting drama to it, but the experience of reading it is just very, very slow. Here's what I do like. So I think this novel has tremendously interesting characters. Rebecca Sharp and Amelia Sedley are the two heroines, and it's interesting to me as a novel written by a man. It is very, very interested in the world of women, and it gives much more psychological complexity to the women than it gives the male characters. I think the men in this book have relatively simple lives, and in the case of, similar to something like Anna Karenina, the men can retreat into this world of war or business or society. They can have so many more things going on in their lives, whereas the women are really kind of restricted to the men they've chosen to marry. And that makes their choice so much more fraught here, because both Rebecca and Amelia are looking for someone that allows them to navigate society in a way that suits them, allows them to live out the lives that they want to live. And so Amelia is a character who is really bright-eyed and optimistic, sees the best in people, but she also kind of comes from money, and so her family is distraught at her decision to marry for love to a man who is also not a great dude. So although they immediately share passion, this is Mr. Osborne that Amelia Sedley marries. Mr. Osborne, after marrying, kind of loses interest in her, and so he starts to explore other spheres of life. He joins the army. He just doesn't spend a lot of time with her. And yet Amelia is so devoted to him and his memory that she just waits, and she just thinks that things will go the way that they should. Whereas Rebecca Sharp, her contrast, is not very well off, but she is extremely shrewd, and so she wants to marry in a certain way that will lead to her having better life prospects. And this leads her into the house of the Crawleys, who are also old money, also very well off, and she secretly marries one of the younger generation there, rather than the patriarch of the family who makes an offer to her. And so these decisions and their consequences echoes throughout this book. There's the Napoleonic Wars in this. It's a big scope of a novel, and they go to all sorts of different countries, all sorts of different things happen. It's one of those novels where I think it'll be very interesting at the end of every chapter just to have the bank balance of each of the characters, because it is very interested in their social outcomes and how much mobility they have. But it's also just very, very hard to follow. There's very many characters, and it's one of those things where if you've read Emma and you remember that subplot where someone buys Emma a piano and they're all trying to work out who the mysterious piano buyer is, a very similar subplot happens here, and it takes twice as long for that to unfold. And in Emma, I thought that subplot was just truly exhausting. It didn't really add to the pace of the novel. It didn't really give any meaning to things. It was just kind of this person wants to flex their money. And here it's kind of even more egregious in that, yes, it's a love story. Yes, it's about characters entering relationships. And I also find it very interesting in the sense of the Victorian novel. We think of the Victorian novel as being very obsessed with the marriage plot and having a narrative structure that is about characters finding the person that they love and the ending being just happily ever after. Whereas so many Victorian novels that are famous kind of eschew this assumption that there's so many Victorian novels about marriages that don't work. And so this novel, the marriages happen around 10-15% of the way in, and the rest of the book is about how this marriage just isn't a good result for either of these women. In the same sense, all the Victorian novels that I can think of that I named, Middlemarch, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, even something like David Copperfield, all of them are about marriages that just don't work out. And the Victorian Convention that you can't divorce them, so now you're stuck. You're in the situation that's terrible for you. And what else is there to do other than mope about it? It also kind of explains why these novels drag out so long, because someone has to die. Like, it's not a book where characters can take their fate into their own hands, because social decorum is just so restrictive. And what I find interesting too is that, having read so much of the French canon, it's getting really dark now, the French canon, and the reputation of French literature for being more open about sex and more open about infidelity, reading The Three Musketeers last month, it's so blasé the way they talk about cheating and how marriages don't seem so restrictive, whereas Vanity Fair is a book that is so explicitly interested in morality. Despite the fact that England in this time is much more Puritan, the books that are written in England feel more salacious because they are about characters at the fringes of a rigid moral structure. Whereas in France, because the moral structure is more lax, then anything goes, whatever. It doesn't feel that transgressive. So here, it's a tough read. It's definitely like a book where, if you're a scholar, you can glean out a huge amount of this society. You can really understand how people think and behave. You can look at every character's actions, like to the minutiae of their speech, and go, they used this word, they said that to this person, they dressed like this, they referenced this Shakespeare play. All of that communicates information about how the society is built and how people are valued in different ways. But as someone reading this in 2026, as a casual reader for enjoyment, it is really not enjoyable. It is a 2 out of 5 for me. And historical significance aside, it's also like fun to talk about, but not fun to read. As a side note too, it's really racist. It has a lot of characters that just blatantly look down on people of any descendancy other than English aristocracy. And it does have characters that go off and make wealth in India, and it's not very prescriptive as to how they do that. It's just kind of like the status of being in India as a white man just lets you accumulate wealth, which of course not, absolutely not. There's so much that needs to be unpacked there that this novel is just not very prescriptive about. There are silly scenes about this, like one comic relief character is eating a curry and then convinces, I think Rebecca Sharp, to try the curry, and she gets like, she thinks it's really spicy, and then she eats a chili because she thinks it'll be chill, and it makes it worse. Like, silly, right? But it rubs me the wrong way to read about Britain's colonial exploits written about in such a blasé way. And yet, I was looking at some reviews trying to get a sense of how I should feel about this book, and there's one by a YouTuber who is of African American descent, and she talks about it so simply as in just eat the fish and spit out the bones. Like, enjoy what's good about the book and throw away what's bad. And to have such an easy solution for that is interesting to me, because I can't distance my empathy for the downtrodden, the people like really glossed over in this book. Like, there's lots of servants in this book that are treated really badly, and I just think about how, if I was alive in this time, there's no way I'm going to be in the aristocracy. I am definitely going to be a servant. And so that's who I'm interested about, and that's how I read these books, and it really makes it hard for me to enjoy them. Love in the Title, The Museum of Modern Love by Heather Rose, is a novel set in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it's an Australian author. Similarly to what I was saying about Australian fiction being obsessed with World War II and obsessed with the sad novel, this is a sad novel. We're also quite obsessed with the concept of art, and we have so many novels that are about artistry, about what the artist does. This is specifically about I'm going to pronounce her name. Marina Abramovich, who is a performance poet and a real artist in the real world. She does a lot of pieces where she herself uses her body as part of the artwork, and this novel references the very famous piece where she sits in MoMA and someone needs to sit opposite her and just look her in the eyes and have this really emotional experience. And so we follow Archie Levin, who is a music composer. He is kind of estranged from his wife, who was terminally ill, and his wife asks him to go and see this exhibit. And so when he's there, he stays there every day, he meets different people, he talks to people about his work and about artistry, and eventually he comes to a deeper understanding of really what it means to be an artist and what it means to communicate your emotions to another human being. He thinks about the responsibilities he has as a partner to someone who is terminally ill, as a father as well, and really just his responsibility as an artist to the world. It's an interesting book. I think the assertions it has about art are very, very optimistic. Although it does delve into the political elements of Abramowich's art and of how her experiences of growing up in Eastern Europe during a lot of really turbulent political eras led to her being a performance artist in this way. Archie Levin is kind of blank. Like, I didn't really get a big sense of his personal backstory or why he became a composer. He just seemed like someone who was in the right place at the right time, and so he became very famous. He travels in this world of very upper echelon New York artists, and I don't want to be dismissive of that. I think, maybe because I've only been in New York for 3 weeks, I can't speak too much on it, but it really did feel like the New York art scene benefited significantly from being in New York. I think a writer or an artist or anybody who wasn't physically in that city but was making work of that caliber really wouldn't be as successful, because the city itself lends a gravitas to your work. And I think that kind of explains why this novel is set in New York and why Abramowich's art is most famously remembered as being part of MoMA, and why Archie Levin as well is in New York. This is a book about artists at their peak, not just artistry, but social influence. Whereas this is an Australian author, and I think about the Miles Franklin, I think about the Stella, which this book won, and I think about how much influence that has in our society, and we're kind of lagging behind, you know? Like, a book that wins the Stella Prize is not going to be known in America. I kind of have my doubts. And whilst I would love for Australian fiction to be more influential around the world, as it happens, this is a story about another culture. The relevance it has to Australia is relevant to the extent that all art universally is relevant to people. And it does make a good argument for that fact. I do think that it does very successfully make the claim that all art is always valuable. And I did walk away from it feeling quite enriched and enjoying my reading experience and wanting to read more. I didn't feel as strongly emotional as I did about Between a Wolf and a Dog, and maybe because Between a Wolf and a Dog is ordinary people that I might actually come across in my day-to-day, whereas none of the characters in this book are anything close to people that I would ever meet in real life. It is an echelon that is completely apart from me, and so the emotions of these people, even though there are events that might happen to people I know, they have access to things, to places, to people, to contacts, to experiences that I will never fathom in my entire life. And I can't really read that aspirationally, because none of these characters are happy. These characters really enjoy anything about what they're doing. It's interesting. Like, I think about it as a kind of peer into this art world, and I don't feel the same sense of understanding of art that even with something like painting portraits of everyone I've ever dated, that novel to me made me feel something about the process of making art, whereas this novel doesn't. I will say in its favor, so Archie Levin's a composer, and I think this novel does a pretty good job of describing both music composition and performance art. Like, these characters felt very believable in their artistry, whereas a novel like Amsterdam by Ian McEwan, which is also about a composer and also about a journalist, I didn't feel that either of those jobs in that book felt like real jobs that people would go to, whereas here, I think that the tension felt by Levin towards the obligations of his composition and the way that his work fits between personal expression and commercial object, like it's there to soundtrack a film, I think that's really interesting. So I think it's pretty well done. Overall, though, I still would give it a 3 out of 5. I don't feel that my life was particularly changed having read this, but as I was reading it, it was pretty enjoyable. I think that book also really suffers from the fact that it was just a bit too similar to everything else I've read this month. And lastly, Something to Answer For by P.H. Newby, the very first Booker Prize winner. And I've said before when talking about Booker Prize winners that the Booker Prize has a type. This novel is absolutely the type. It is a novel about the fallibility of memory that deals with post-colonial ideas. It's set in Port Said in Egypt, and it is interested in the lingering effects of English colonialism and how much influence the British Empire has on the rest of the world, and it is just everything that the Booker Prize winners are about. But like a lot of the early Booker Prize winners, I'm going to compare this to Heat and Dust, to Staying On, to... It's just not as good at doing that as some of the later post-colonial works. To me, it feels like a country and a nation and an identity that is a bit insecure about what influence it had and has on the world. It's very curious about whether British influence on its former colonies was ever a good thing, and if it was a good thing, then should it be allowed to continue, or should it still end, and all of these nations and people groups be kind of left to their own devices after the British came in and rejigged everything. So, in addition to all of that, it's sort of a spy thriller. It's kind of hard to describe. So Townrow is the protagonist. He is an ex-soldier, and he was previously in Port Said for various reasons, and now he's arriving back because the widow of a man he used to be friends with suspects that her husband passed away due to some kind of conspiracy. And so she's asked him to come and investigate. When he's arrived, he's questioned by this Jewish man on the plane about the BBC's involvement in sending Jews to Germany and to the concentration camps. And they question whether the BBC should have been liable to warn Jewish people to not go there. This kind of sets off various questions of what was right for the British government to do in various circumstances, in various political conflicts. Should they be interventionist? Should they step in when certain things are happening? Or should they stay aside because the individual and the country are both going to really mess things up? And Townrow's big question here is he a representative of England? Is he a representative of English values and English political influence when he himself is just a dude? And as a dude, he is very fallible. He doesn't communicate well to people around him. He gets in various cultural shocks and discourses. His own memory is extremely fallible. He doesn't entirely know who he is sometimes. He gets very drunk, he gets beaten up, he gets his clothes stolen. He's just not a very functional protagonist. And amidst all of this, he is very guided by sexual desire. And over the course of the novel, one of the things that feels the most true is that he needs to chase his romantic and sexual prospects. And because of that, he is not a good ambassador. He is not a good problem solver, because sometimes he just thinks with his anatomy. And how do I feel about this as a protagonist? To me, I feel like we're positioned to judge him, but also so much of this book is vague. So much of the book is like, you're not entirely sure who he is or what he's there for. You're not entirely sure who these motivations or these characters are. Very little is real for you to grasp onto. And so the narrator isn't, or the book isn't making a particular statement on any particular political view. It's hard to see what it's trying to say because it is just so vague about it. And to me, it's like, it's very emblematic of early postmodern writing. It reminds me a little bit of what happened towards the end of Midnight's Children, where there's a number of weird passages that are kind of just there to suggest to the reader, like, maybe we don't know, maybe we'll never know, maybe there is no truth, and maybe this book was just a giant mess. And I feel that similar thing here, but there's less delicacy and less care to it. I just felt like I was getting lost constantly. And I know that this is the intention of the book, but when I pick it back up and when I can follow along with who Townrow is and what he's doing, it's often just bumbling through the world, being guided by sexual desire, and not really caring about the path of destruction in his wake. At the same time, being very insecure about Britain's interaction with this country and with the people there. that he himself doesn't want to be responsible for what his country does. But he himself is also going to make a lot of personal mistakes. Yeah, it's and amidst all of that, I wish I could just tell you what the plot is, but I don't know, and I can't say for sure. I don't think it's because I read it wrong. I think it's because there's just not enough clues to say definitively what happens. I could read it again, I could try to figure out what the meaning is, but I'm not going to. I'm going to set it aside. It is 2 out of 5. It's the first Booker Prize winner. They're trying to find the legs. What can you say? So I hope across these books it's pretty clear what my type is now with fiction. I think I really do have a type of book that I seek out, a type of book that I like, and a type of book that I don't. I really enjoy having fun. I really enjoy characters that I relate to and are similar to me. I really enjoy good dialogue and realism, and I don't like being confused. So I wish I wasn't as disappointed as I was with some of these books, but that's the way it goes. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next month.